Are you tired of watching hours of confusing videos by guitar music theory experts on YouTube and still not understanding a darn thing they're on about? Then you need the Songwriting Inspiration app. For only $5, you can organize 6,000 guitar chords into relative major and minor keys and get tons of fresh new ideas for more sophisticated chord progressions and songs. Downloading Song is like downloading music theory straight into your brain. Link is in the description. Hey, how's it going, dudes and dudettes? Brad the Guitarologist here. I'm having to redo this entire video with voiceover because my audio kind of screwed up. But this is the 1968 Bassman amp that I did the abnormal channel modification on a while back. I did a couple videos on this. It actually already came back one time because it was having some noise issues, but and I fixed that noise issue and it wasn't getting any noise issue, and I sent it back to the guy. And he sent it back, and it's got more noise issues now, so it's frying bacon. Listen to this. So you can kind of see there what I mean about frying bacon. That usually means that some resistor is in the process of failing or has already sort of failed internally, and I need to track down which resistor or resistors this is. This is the one that had some water damage on the front grill, and generally it just really smells like it may have been exposed to some moisture or some water or something at some point along its life. It's just got that kind of scent to it. So we're going to try to track down exactly what's going on with this thing. And if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, stick around. Okay, so the first thing I do here is grab my chopstick, my trusty chopstick, and start chopsticking around in this thing to try to see if I can discover which component is failing. And the idea here is just to move some things around and see if I can't get the crackling to get worse. Or to, change sound, and that would give me some idea if I'm in the right area or not. I did find a microphonic capacitor, one of the ceramic capacitors that's really common. Those generally don't fail, but this one is microphonic. Not a huge deal, but it's something we may come back to a little bit later. But generally, my attempts to discover the problem here using the chopstick method are unsuccessful. I wasn't able to track it down. I did also move to the spray method, where I spray a few suspect components with some some cold spray, and that did not yield any results either. So we're going to have to move down the line and try some other troubleshooting methods. All right, so the next thing to do is to attempt to isolate which channel is the problem. So I'm starting pulling tubes. I started with V1 and the problem persisted. So now we're moving on to V2 here. So we pull V2 and actually everything quieted right down after pulling V2. And you can see here what I mean. Listen to this. So no more frying bacon at all. So we've kind of narrowed it down to the second channel being at fault. So at this point, I went ahead and popped a couple new tubes in V1 and V2, and the frying bacon sound is still there. So at this point, my game plan was to go ahead and start changing old components that were associated with the first couple of stages, and namely the plate resistors and any interstage coupling capacitors that could be causing this kind of noise. I decided to go ahead and just replace. So in an effort to sort of document where I'm at, I changed the first two plate resistors on the first tube first, and then fired it back up to see what was going to happen after that, and also replaced them with the metal film type resistors rather than the carbon style that were in there originally. And still I was getting the frying bacon, so we move on to the next part. So the idea now is to move down to the V2 tube and change the plate resistors for that tube. It's going to be that resistor right there, and the other plate resistor has already been changed. Actually, I had put it on that terminal right there previously. So let's change that one right there and see what happens. Okay, so after firing it back up, I still had the frying bacon issue, so I checked a couple of other things. I checked the cathode resistors, the bias resistors on each stage, and I sprayed those with some spray to see if that changed things. I also sprayed the V3 plate resistors with some spray to see if that changed things. It didn't really seem to, but I decided to go ahead and just start replacing anything that was old in this thing anyway. Like I said, this thing had been exposed to some kind of moisture at some point and just had a really funky, weird smell to it. And it just seemed to me that some of these components are probably pretty old, and it was time for a lot of the old carbon style resistors to go. So I just started with plate resistors and decided to move on from there. Also, in the course of troubleshooting, I realized that I was getting some of the telltale whoosh whoosh sound on channel 1 that usually accompanies a bad coupling capacitor before the tone stack on one of these, and that is the coupling capacitor right there. And to check that, I went ahead and fired it up and put my meter on the other side of it to see what kind of voltages were possibly leaking through. And sure enough, I was getting some DC voltage that was leaking to the other side of that. So instead of just replacing the one capacitor that I knew was bad here, I went ahead and replaced all three of those, since all three of those capacitors were of the same type and had been exposed to the same conditions over the years. You can see here, for instance, the one capacitor that I knew was leaky had some spider's eggs under it. Okay, so after replacing all the shown components and a couple of more components on down the line after this, I discovered that I had a broken tube in the V2 position, and the amp was extremely quiet. So for a second I thought, man, I've really fixed this thing. It's so quiet now. But the reason was this tube had broken, and I think it's just that the fact that it's oversized. I had put these JJs in there, and they're so wide they barely even fit inside the sockets on this amp. And I think maybe at one point after wiggling it, I had cracked it, and then it just kind of died. So that's why it was so quiet there for a second, and I thought I had it fixed. But nope, it's still frying bacon, so we've got some more troubleshooting to do. Okay, so doing some signal tracing on this, I finally figured out where the problem was. This is my probe that I signal trace with, and I'm running the probe into an amplifier up here, and the amplifier also has a headphone out, so it allows me to put some isolation headphones on, and I can more accurately hear exactly what's going on. And that's particularly nice if I'm not using a dummy load and I'm using this speaker on the output. As you can see there's my speaker that I usually use as a load on the output of my amplifiers. Okay, so here's what I've determined. What happens is the signal gets injected into the amplifier, and it goes to the first stage, which is this half of the V2, and then it comes out of there and comes back over to the gain control right here. Then it comes out of that and then goes all the way back over again to this half of V3, Then it comes out of that stage and goes here to through the tone stack. Then it goes through to the volume control, comes off the wiper of the volume control through this black wire right here, which is shielded, back over here to this half of V3. And then after that, it makes its way back over here to the V2, the second half of the V2. And then that's the final stage before it makes its way out to the phase inverter and then on out to the output. So what I discovered using my signal tracing method is that when I injected my probe onto the plate of this half of V2, that's the final stage before the output on this channel, I was getting the noise, but I was not getting the noise into that tube. We've already determined that the tube wasn't bad, so something else is going on with this particular stage that's causing the injection of this noise into that stage. And once again, I'm getting it on the plate, but I'm not getting it into the grid. So at this point, I decided to go ahead and replace the cathode bias resistor for that stage. I have had experiences in the past where cathode bias resistors and also bypass capacitors have caused such noise. So I decided to go ahead and lift the leg on the bias or the bypass capacitor to see if that was the problem. But it was to no avail. The fry and bacon still persisted. So at this point, I decided to look back at the schematic for this amplifier, and sure enough, there is a feedback resistor that feeds positive feedback from the plate of this stage back into the grid of this stage. It's a 470K resistor there, and I determined that could be the problem. So I lifted the leg on that resistor, leaving the wire in place that connected the two eyelets. But to no avail. The crackling was still there, and actually it was more pronounced now because I didn't have the feedback that was snubbing out some of the signal. So I decided to reattach it momentarily and then trace it back even further, and there's a junction where it comes back before the coupling cap into the grid, and at that junction there are also a couple of 220K resistors that are coming in from each channel. So I decided to lift in the legs on those resistors, and lo and behold, the problem went away. Those were located right here in this spot where these capacitors are now. So what I decided to do here is instead of a 220K resistor here and another one there, I decided to put two capacitors, one here and one here. For the abnormal channel, I lowered the capacitor so because I was getting when I cranked the bass up slightly, I was getting a lot of low frequency oscillations anyway. So I decided to lower that value from 0.01 to a 0.005. So this one right here is a 0.005. This bass channel, I replaced that 220K with a 0.001 capacitor, and then where the capacitor was, I put a 220K resistor right here instead, and I removed the capacitor that was going from there to there, which was very noisy. It was a ceramic 0.01 capacitor that was right there, and the whole thing, you could just really tap on it. Even tapping around it was introducing all kinds of noise. So I got rid of that. Change these capacitors from the ceramic type to the poly style, and again move the 220 resistor after that point to there, and got rid of this 470K, which was going from there, this eyelet over to here, and there was a wire under the board from this point over to there. I just removed that wire altogether and removed that resistor, and also changed this resistor, this value. This resistor right here was a 470K. I changed that to a 100K and really tamed things down to a manageable level, so there wasn't so much hiss and noise when it was just idling, because I was getting a lot of hiss, a lot of noise at idle. And actually, if you want to run this even quieter than it already is, slightly quieter. Now, it doesn't quiet it down a whole lot, but it does quiet it some. You can pull the V1 tube if you're not using this first channel at all. If you're just going into this channel anyway, you can pull that tube, and it's going to quiet it down somewhat, not a lot, but a little bit. Basically, you've got one stage of gain that's hooking up to this point, and it's, you know, kind of introducing a little bit of noise. If well, I mean, especially when it's out on the disc, but it's not bad. It's manageable, and it's not really that far above what it normally would be, I don't think. Just a stock Bassman at the moment, especially after changing that to a 100K resistor. So that's where we are. Again, I changed a lot of stuff in this since I got it back. I was kind of chasing around trying to find the source of that noise, which again turned out to be the 220K resistor that was right there in this point. It was very damaged internally, and that was the source of the problem. So this is basically an all-new amp. If you'll notice, there's not a lot that's original. I've got a couple of original capacitors right here, this one and this one. I've got, that's an original resistor, but not a whole lot else is original on the board. I mean, here downstream, there's a couple original resistors tucked in here and there. There's some on down the end of the line that are original resistors, but for the most part, this thing is going to be an all-new amplifier. So, yeah, I think she's ready to go. I think it's ready to be packed up, sent back. Before we send it back, we'll give it another test just to remind ourselves how awesome this thing sounded.